Welcome to the Invested Teacher Podcast with Kyle Pierce, Matt Bigley, and John Orr.
Get ready to be taught as we share our successes and failures encountered during our real-life lessons, learning how to build generational wealth from the ground up.
Welcome, invested students, to another episode of the Invested Teacher Podcast.
Well, my friends, we are excited that the three of us get to come together and chat a little bit today about 10xing our lives. And some of you might be thinking, they're talking about 10xing like investing, but no, we're actually talking about 10xing your life, and it can really be any area of it. And I think we're going to use a recent book as sort of the catalyst for this discussion.
We are. And I think when you say like 10xing our life, I think, Kyle, what it means to me, is 10xing anything you want to 10x. So if it's 10xing your investments, it's 10xing your investments. If it's 10xing your business, then it's 10xing your business. If it's 10xing your personal relationships with your family and your friends, then you're 10xing that. And I think the idea that the book being 10x is easier than 2x, from two individuals. We've read many other books. Dan Sullivan from Strategic Coach, and also Benjamin Hardy wrote this book. They also wrote Who Not How. They also wrote The Gap in the Gain. Great books. This particular episode, we're going to dive into why 10x is easier than 2x. Guys, I think the premise here in this kind of book study episode of this podcast is because you'd think that most people, when they make especially business goals, financial goals, economic goals for their businesses, they will say, I'm going to 2x, I'm going to double my revenue, I'm going to double the investment portfolio. Like, these are goals we make to ourselves on a regular basis.
And often they're lofty, right? Like 2x
sounds
feels
lofty.
like a lot.
It does feel like if you're doing 100% of the work now, and you say, I'm going to double it, now you automatically think I got to double my workload, right? Like that does feel very lofty. And actually, I was reading the book, How to Grow Your Small Business, Donald Miller, and he actually recommends, this is a controversy to the book we're reading right now. He recommends, guys, that you should write a 2x goal for your economic goal. So it's kind of like, so he's saying, like, just make a doubling of your revenue. And then when you do that, you double your revenue again. And then you double your revenue again. So eventually you're going to 10x your revenue. But in this book, they're saying, Hardy's book and Sullivan's book is saying it's actually easier to 10x than 2x if you change your mindset. And it is a mindset book. They've got some practical things in the book, but completely a mindset from start to ending, how to wrap your mind around how to think about 10xing your business or or anything that you want in your life versus saying doubling. And I think it goes to this idea where that I just said, that what we just kind of commented on, that if you think of doubling the workload you have now, if I double the amount of investment portfolios, that means I have to double the amount of input, which in this book, they argue is not the case. It's actually easier to 10x because you're not just doubling your input, you're actually redesigning what the input looks like so that you can achieve the 10x without doubling your input.
And I think, John, to hear you describe it like this book kind of defies conventional thinking. And I think this is where, like, this book was like the best kind of punch in the face. Like, I remember it stopped me in my tracks. I heard Dr. Benjamin Hardy on an episode of the Ed Milet show, and I immediately sent you guys the episode. I was like, this episode is mind blowing. Went out and bought the book. You guys went out and bought the book. I then shared it with my wife, Kyle. You shared it with your wife. Like, I was so struck by, like, finally hearing something that resonated so deeply with what I'm going to say is, I think, kind of candid and revealing here. It's like, when you work really, really hard in your entrepreneurial pursuit, a lot of times it looks really different than society, than coworkers, than colleagues. And that ultimately is kind of a oddly isolating feeling, like to be out of step with what convention suggests, and I will admit that at times this entrepreneurial journey, like, I'm so grateful to have the two of you as friends and as business partners. But if I'm to be totally honest, like, we're going against the grain here, so I think hearing this book, like, spoke right to my soul. It was like therapeutic, because sometimes I'm like, holy smokes, like, what we're doing, the life we're pursuing and the work we're putting into it, is just so different than the norm. And it doesn't like, and it's only because it's been a choice. Like, I love when Gary Vee says, listen, if you want to play softball on Wednesday nights, play softball. If you like, whatever it is you want to do. And in this case, it's like, we want to work really hard on this entrepreneurial thing. And so, I'm not a golfer, I'm not a hockey player, I'm not a this, not a that. I'm an entrepreneur and I'm a lover of ideas. And so this book just like was profound. I that was its impact on me for sure. It hit me deep.
I love it. And yeah, absolutely. Like, I sent it on to Chantel. I know Chantel's been going through her own mindset journey, definitely not around business by any means, but in terms of just setting her own goals in life. And that's why, to your points, both of you gentlemen, saying that this isn't about just 10xing investments or financial freedom. Like, you can apply this to anything in your life. And what popped into my brain there when you said the Gary Vee softball idea, Matt, is like, if, let's say, that's what you want to do, then go 10x on it and do it. And maybe you want to do it 4 nights a week and rock and roll, go do it. But you know what I've done in my life in many cases is that I go and I do the opposite, and I actually spread myself too thin. So I'll play hockey on Tuesday because I enjoy hockey, but I don't want to go 10x on it. And then I do this other thing on a different night, and I do this other. So I'm spreading myself so thin. And when you think about it, oftentimes when you're doing those things, you're going through the motions and you're not actually giving your all. Like, at times I'm not giving my full effort or attention towards, say, hockey with the guys that I'm playing with. And sure, I feel good that I made it and I caught up with them and, have a beer in the dressing room after, do all of those wonderful things. But at the end of the day, it's like, it's not my quote unquote best work, right? And the same can be true for so many things that we do through life. And the word that pops into my mind when we talk about this is this idea of drifting. And Napoleon Hill, I think I brought it up on an episode previously, but I think I incorrectly cited the book it came from. It's actually from Outwitting the Devil, which is a book that's not as common. It's not as popular as some of the other Napoleon Hill books. But Outwitting the Devil, they talk about this idea of drifting, where most people drift through life. And what they mean is you just sort of drift to whatever's happening, whatever lies in front of you. And I think that's why so many people think about people who are successful. A lot of people assume that they must have gotten quote unquote lucky, right? So it was like they luckily drifted to the thing that got them successful. When in reality, if you actually peel back the onion on that, I'm going to argue that the vast majority actually were very clear on what they wanted. They focused all in on those things. And that's not actually luck. It's that they committed to it and they weren't just drifting around kind of seeing what falls in front of you. Oftentimes, hey, certain friends fall before you, right? There's friends of convenience. There's, hey, the kids, the parents on the soccer team that, you're connecting with, and oh, that person's nice and this person's nice. So it's convenient. You've drifted in that direction. You can also drift in other directions. You can drift aimlessly, or you can sort of get focused in on what it is that you really want to do and then start committing all of your energy towards it. And that's where this 10x happens. 10x cannot happen if you're focused on way too many things. And as John, you and I always say to our district partners that we work with when we do our coaching and consulting in mathematics, we tell them that most often districts have way too many priorities and therefore they have none, right? So they are not applying this same 10x principle, this 80-20 rule, and focusing all of their effort on the most important 20%. They're trying to focus on every percentage point, all 100 parts of the puzzle, when in reality, each one of those pieces can impact and influence the outcome so significantly, so significantly different than maybe what you're actually after.
Yeah. And I think Kyle, when you mentioned the 80-20 rule, and I think you articulated here, you have to get clear on what you want. I think that's the hardest part, right? Like I think the hard part is deciding, where do I focus my 20%? Like, where do I focus my, my efforts? What do I really want? And there's a part of the book, like there's a chapter of the book where they talk about wants versus needs. And And, I think it helps you, wrap your mind around, wanting what you want, because I think there's a lot of pressure that you should only want certain things. And, when you want something like you want 10x your business, or you want to 10x your portfolio, and you want to work on that all the time. Like when you've identified that that's the thing you want, that, as I said, that's hard to figure out. But once you decide that's what I want, now you feel like you have to justify it to people, and the book does a great job of trying to help you realize you don't have to justify it to people. Like, you want what you want, and that's okay. Like, you are going to be moving at a 10x speed, whereas 2x, if you were moving at 2x, you say, well, I want to double my revenue, or I want to double my portfolio, and that's something you want. Be like, well, now you have to justify it to somebody else. Like, you're trying to justify your 2x moves, and you feel confident there to do that. But when you go 10x, it's so big, right? To go 10x, to go all in on this thing that you want to work on, or want to do, or want to achieve, that you have to feel like you have to justify it to somebody. But I think the book does a great job of saying, like, you don't have to justify it. You just work on it. And that is, like what you said before, it is alienating, because those, those 2x people are going to fall away. Like, you're not going to have them, beside you anymore. Like, you're
what
actually
about the 1x people? There's a lot of people that are like that as well. I'm sure they're not listening to this podcast,
no, but the book,
I mean, the vast majority of people I don't even think are thinking 2x, right?
Yeah.
But folks who are listening to this probably are.
And if you listen to if you get this book and you listen to the audio version, at the end of every chapter, they interview Dan Sullivan, and it's the two of them talking about what they just wrote in the chapter. You won't get that in the actual written part of the book. So it's kind of like a bonus. And I remember when they're chatting that he says specifically that when you go 10x, you repel 2x. So you're going to, like, push actually everyone away who doesn't think that way. And that's that scary part, because you actually have to change your, it's like you said, your friends may fall away. You're going to find 10x people. You're going to surround yourself with 10x people because you're going that route. But your 2x people are going to go away. It reminded me of like, what addicts have to go through when they change their habits. Like, if I'm going to stop smoking, I can't actually go out on smoke break anymore. I can't hang around with these people because I will start smoking again. Or, like, that's what people say. Or if you're drinking and you're an alcoholic, you actually can't do the things that you would normally do. You have to change complete habits. You can't hang out with the same social crowd anymore, because you'll just fall back into those habits. Like, it's the same thing with 10x and 2x, is that if you really want a 10x, it will be easier. It will be easier, but you do repel all the people that aren't going to think like that, and you don't have to justify it to them.
Yeah, you said a lot there, John, and some great points I'd like to, just circle back to. And one of them was just about really being, Dan Sullivan does such a great job of this in the audio part of it, where he just says, like, be unapologetic about what you want. And I think, again, the societal pressure on all of us is to, like, say the right answer, about the things we want. He says in the book, he's like, if all you want right now is to get really, really rich, if wealth, and that just sounds so shallow and so, so it's just so lacking. He's like, that is okay. Like, stop worrying about what other people, it doesn't have to be philanthropic. It doesn't have to be community based. Now, he said maybe it gets there, but I love that, almost like that permission for us to stop, like, hiding what it is we actually want. And that was like a powerful message that we don't really hear very often. And I think a lot of people kind of get caught, like, lying to themselves and others. And another guy we listen to a lot, Hormozy, like, he talks about how if you don't believe in what you're doing or what you're selling, it's going to be noticeable. Like, you're not going to be as successful. And so I think that translates here. It's like, if you're not being honest about what you want, like, your pursuit of that is just going to ring a little bit hollow, and I think ultimately be unfounded. So I love that part, and and you touching on that really really sparked it again for me.
Well, that part of the book and you bringing it back up kind of brings me back to this like vulnerable state where I feel, and I don't know if both of you felt the same way. Maybe Matt, it might have been maybe earlier in your journey where you had left teaching, but I know that being known in, say, the math education community and doing the work that we've done, John and I have done in the math community, that it was almost like doing this podcast was actually a little scary for me. It was risky, right? Because I was like, what will all the educators think about us? Like, will they think that we're greedy? Like, will they think? And that part of the book really helped me to overcome that, because the reality is they also go on to say, and I don't know if you guys remember this in the book, but they go on to say that actually it's not money that entrepreneurs want. And Dan Sullivan, says, he's like, a lot of people think people who are entrepreneurial or who have businesses, that they're just money hungry, but they're actually not. Money is the first, step in the path that will get them to what they want, which is time freedom. And that piece for me was really reassuring, because
That's part of it.
I've always done this work, and I've invested in real estate since, we've talked about it ad nauseum back, over 10 years ago when I started this path on my own journey before I had met both of you guys. And I didn't know exactly why I was doing it, because like, it wasn't for, Lamborghinis. It wasn't to be quote unquote rich. It was more from safety, but now I start to recognize that it's like, okay, once you get safety done and I feel secure, now I want to get to this place where it's like, I can truly decide what I do with my time. And we are more and more every day. We're closer to that goal. But we're just excited about the work. Like, that's the beauty of it. And I would argue that if we aren't excited about doing the work, if we weren't excited about doing the work in mathematics, which we still are excited about that work, and if we're not excited about doing the work over here in building wealth and helping to mentor others and coach people along, then we wouldn't be here doing this podcast either. Because at the end of the day, it is a lot of work before any of that flywheel, if we go back to that episode, any of that flywheel starts to move. And anyone who is sort of just kind of kicking tires, trying to find a way to make money, typically it falls off, right? So again, it's like looking at that end goal and getting clear on why you want to do what you want to do, and then finding the things that you are actually willing to go all in on is really important. And I would argue for the vast majority of people out there, especially those working 9 to 5s and working those salaried jobs, they're doing a job that they might not mind, but they probably aren't dying to continue doing it when they get home at night. Whereas that's not actually true for us. Like we do this all the time in the evening. We do all of this thinking. It's almost like nonstop, and it's just part of who we are. And it makes that 10x mindset so much easier to follow through on, but then also to kind of like feel okay about it too. And that we're actually not that weird, even though a lot of people would probably still think so.
You said, that you thought, entrepreneurship was, not, people think about money, but it was really about freedom of time. And I partly agree with that. And I think it's more than that though. I think you help clarify that too in your explanation, but I feel like it's freedom of time in a certain way, right? Like, it's freedom for you to pursue entrepreneurship is freedom for you to pursue the 20% of tasks, the 20% of things that really drive you as a person, but also, what's going to drive, the rest of your goals further. So for example, when we were teaching math classes, and Matt, I was telling you this, I think last week, is that I think when I look at, all the history of all the things that really I was passionate about, and it, eventually became an entrepreneurship, a defining moment for me. But I mean, like, when you think about what we were doing, Kyle, with math, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, what really I loved about teaching math was the creative part of designing, thinking of a problem, like, it actually was like problem solving in a way. It's like, there's a problem to solve, like helping kids get better at math, but also helping kids like and enjoy math better. And it was like, how can I solve that problem in a creative way? And I get to see the result. That was something that really sparked and made me feel very excited about teaching, proud of the teaching moments. It was really just identifying where there was a gap, where's a hole, and can I fill that hole by finding a unique solution to it, and then seeing if it worked, and then doing that again, like a little science experiment. Like that's all we did in our math classes to build up, the success for our own students. You would say, hey, I'm going to try this lesson. Does it work? Yeah, hey, it worked. And we got what we wanted. And then we did that with our business, our math
more
business.
of that, and then less of the stuff that didn't work. Right.
Right.
Same
right.
idea.
So it's like, hey, when we started to systematize that with Make Math Moments, we were also going, okay, well, you know what? There's a problem to solve here in business. There's back end pieces to this business that I got really excited about solving, because it was like that part needed to be solved. And it's like, let me figure out a creative way to solve that problem, and I'll see if it worked. And that part became, one of the things I got really passionate about in building businesses, is like trying to solve these unique problems and see if they worked. And then Matt, when we, the work that we're going to do together, it's the same thing. It's like, there's a problem to solve here. Let's see if we can find a creative solution to that. Like for me, entrepreneurship is like the freedom to not just, have time, but freedom for you to focus on the 20% of things. Like for me, the 20% are those things. What problem needs to be solved, and can I find a creative solution to fill that and see if it worked? And for me, it's like, I will go all in on that every day. And where can I do that more? That's all I really want to do. And I know that part also will drive all the other things around the work that we're doing. So it's not only just kind of thinking about freedom, it's freedom of like giving you time to focus on the 20% of things that really matter to you and really matter to your business, or really matter to your, your investing life, that are going to push you to the next level. And doing that, because the other 80%, right? The other 80%, you don't need to do anymore. Like that's why we took the leap here in a sense of like, if I can focus on just those things, just those problem solving aspects, I don't want to do that anymore, because I know it's not going to drive us further.
I think that's the advice therein for the audience, John. And the title of the book, 10x is simpler than 2x. This is why it's simpler. It's clarifying for you to think about your most important work and your most valuable roles and skills. That's the part that makes it simple. Like you can just shed so much of those roles. And John, we're in a really interesting moment right now where I'm bringing you into my business and some of the work that we're doing. And you've identified, you've clarified, you've simplified what your most valuable work and roles and skills are. And I've now brought you into my business to be one of my who's. And, they've got another great book called Who Not How. So you've become a who in my world, and I've become a who to you, because that was part of that money freedom that, allowed you to take this entrepreneurial step. And we'll talk about your 10x step, hopefully as a little teaser in this episode, and maybe revisit in a future episode. But that's what is so simplifying about this, is it's just a different way of thinking. I think when I think about my real estate business and how we've got all these different hats, we've got the marketing hat and the operations hat, and we've got the transaction hat, and we've got the sales hat, which is really the hat I want to be doing, except much of my time is spent in all of the minutia of all these other little things that I don't love doing but need to be done. And that's where you get distracted, and that's where we get prone to, as Kyle said earlier, drifting. So to bring you in with that strength of operations and that problem solving is going to create so much capacity for me to be able to drive more business and to have a better quality of life. And those have been our conversations about working together in my business. I said there's two measurables here that we're looking for: an improved quality of life, so it's not 24/7 all the time, and part of that is a trust that things are getting done behind the scenes. And the second one is to drive more business. And if you're focusing on that 20% of activities, those things that you are truly best at, then not only will you be more fulfilled, but you will certainly be more successful when it comes time to your work, to your growth, and to all of your relationships as well.
Well, like that's a massive piece here for everyone listening to think about. This idea of like mastering the art of quitting is really important. And today, right before this episode, you went and had to go put a couple signs in the ground, right? Like you were coming in from that, and it's like you're in the process, and really you're in the process of the last section of the book, which is this idea of creating a self-running company or a self-managing company, right? Like that is a goal that you see, where then you can do the things that you are honing in on and you're focusing on. And when we think about the art of quitting and thinking about what it is that you want, so once again, thinking about that, Matt has described what he wants for his business. I want everybody out there listening to kind of do the same thing and think about what that is. If you haven't thought that through yet, or you're not clear on it yet, you need to continue thinking on that. So that's a first step. But then the next one would be, okay, how do I 10x from here to there? Well, a great part of the book, which I want to make sure we touch on here before we wrap things up, is this idea of looking back to where you are now versus where you were when you were at 1/10 of where you are now. And every person in the world has 10x'd in their life, whether they recognize it or not. And this is sort of like the gap, the gap versus the gain mentality, right? Yep. This idea that you are in the gain. We're not in the gap, right? So people look at themselves and go, I wish I was here, or had this, or I didn't get to the place I wanted to be. But if you actually pause and go, well, wait a second, if now, if you're a teacher and you've been on, teaching for more than 10 years and, in Ontario, you were earning a whole lot less. Or maybe it was before you started teaching where, you were like, hey, I was serving tables and now my salary has 10x'd. All right. What were the things that mattered? What were the things that actually helped you get from there to here? And I'm going to argue that the vast majority, 80% probably, didn't help you get to where you are now, or at least the positive parts of where you are now. So what were the 20%? And now you have to go, okay, well, if that's true from where I was to where I am now, what is the 20% for me moving forward, right? And how can I focus more on that 20%? You're not going to be perfect. No one's going to be perfect. But if you're thinking about that and you constantly think about it and continue to refine what those things are, you might think this thing over here is part of your 20%. And you might learn after a month, after a year, after however long, that it's actually not. And you take it out and you add something else. That's the 20%. And you focus on that. And I would argue that if I know where I'm going and I know where I've been and I'm reflective on where I've been, where I am and where I'm going, I can get there faster. And this is where the 10x is truly easier than 2x, because you don't have to be stretched so thin doing everything and anything. And, I get on calls with invested students like those listening here today. And I chat with them and I'll say the most common challenge that I find people are dealing with is that they're trying to deal with all 100%. They're looking at everything. A recent call, this person had done a little bit of everything, but hadn't done a lot of one thing, or hadn't done a lot of a few things. This person knew a lot about many things. They talk about assigning deals. They talked about flipping. They talked about rent to owns. They talked about, multifamily. They had an options course they've done. They did courses in all these things. So they're like, wow, they've learned so much, but they haven't actually done a lot of any one thing. And that's because they haven't paused to go, where am I? They've sort of drifted to all these very investor-like things, but they're still drifting in this zone instead of deciding what's my 20%. And I told them, and I said, so which one is it? And they said, well, what do you mean? I don't know which one's going to be the most successful. I said, oh, I can't tell you what that is. I'm like, you need to decide which one are you going to be most successful in, because each of those paths, there is a way for you to be successful in it. But the problem is that you're hoping that somehow magically that someone's going to tell you which one is the best one. And every person that taught the courses, all of the courses you took, all of those people are crushing it in each of those areas because they want to and because they're focusing on it. They're not focusing on all of them. They're focusing on one. And that's why they think theirs is the best. It's because it's the one that they're willing to 10x on instead of just 2xing everything and not really taking any of these things seriously.
Yeah. Think about it like that. For you to bounce around like that, you have to be operating in the gap, because because if you're putting you're going all in on learning, like let's say I'm taking those courses, or I'm learning about this one, I'm doing my fact finder, I'm trying to understand, should I go down that route? And you get down that route, and before you've taken action on that route, you're probably, if you're going to bounce out of that route and go to a different route that quickly and that often, you must be measuring your gap, which is saying like, where I want to be here, but I'm not there. So I'm measuring against this ideal that doesn't exist, or it's too far away at this time. So I'm measuring like where I need to get to instead of where I've been. Because if I measure where I've been and you're going like, wow, like look at all what I've learned, you're probably automatically going to start to go like, well, now I need to go here, and you don't need to bounce around as much because of that measuring of the gap in the gain. And when you measure in the game, you're constantly thinking about, the things that you've done well on and how that's useful for you. And I think when you decide, how is this useful for me, that's where you get to like apply or take that next step to like, 10x where you're supposed to be. And then from that book, The Gap in the Game, same authors, they had a great exercise that I think worked well, and this is something that you could take away from this episode too, as we wrap here. But, every day at the end of the day, you bring out your planner. I don't know. I know you guys aren't not always the planner people. I'm a planner person. This is my day. I left this at work the other day. I wasn't at home, and I was like, I felt naked all day. It was like, I needed it beside me. And it's like when you, at the end of the day, if you write down the, three things, what were your big wins? Like Kyle, we always talk about big wins when we have our meetings, or quick wins. It's the thinking of where your progress has been. That's measuring the gain. It's like, what three things were a big, a good win for me today? So you list those, at the evening when the day is over, you're constantly thinking about that. And then we write down, what are three wins for tomorrow? And then you're now going, hey, I'm going to have 3 wins tomorrow. And then you're every day. The beauty about this, and they outline this in the book, is that the beauty of doing both of those is that you're setting yourself up for success tomorrow. And then every day, because you're writing 3 wins, no matter what, even if you felt like you lost, there's a win in there, right? You either win or you learn, right? So then there is that win, and every day you're getting wins. And when you're getting wins every day, that's how you're going to get to 10x.
Boys, this was an awesome chat today. I loved this book, and I'm excited for listeners to check it out as well. This whole concept of us unpacking books and sharing them with listeners on air, I think this has been a lot of fun, and I'd love to propose that we do it again, and maybe we reach out to our listeners for some suggestions. What should we be reading next? What's out there? Hit us up on socials or in our podcast reviews. We'd love to hear some other suggestions, because there's nothing like an amazing, profound, impactful book to just hit you in all the right places and encourage you in the work that you're doing, and push you along to even greater growth. That's what we're all about here.
Hey, everybody, we want to thank you for listening today, and we want to also encourage you to share the podcast with your friends, your family. Make sure you hit follow on all social media platforms as well. We are at Invested Teacher. We're over on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, or whatever you call it, and TikTok. We're over there as well. So make sure you follow those platforms, because we are publishing clips of our episodes, other goodies over on all those channels. So stay with us, friends. We have new stuff every week for you.
I love it. Hey, and remember, you can head over to investedteacher.com, and you'll see a contact button or a book a call button with us. And hey, regardless of what your situation, we always, our number one goal is to make sure that you get at least one big takeaway from the call, one next step. And so far, we, friends, are at 100% on that. We ask every call to those who reach out to us, and we try to provide you with some next steps. Sometimes it's us being able to actually assist with you. Other times it's us redirecting you to other sort of places, other contacts where you might want to continue that discussion or that journey. But one thing that I want you to keep in mind is that, hey, we do this because we're passionate about learning. We're passionate about sharing and teaching. And of course, we want to make sure that you, friends, are experiencing your greatest success. And hopefully today on this episode, you got some ideas from the 10x is greater than 2x discussion. And I'm sure if you book a discovery call with us, you will have another step along that journey so you can dig even deeper into that most important 20%.
Links, resources, and transcripts from this episode can be found over on the website. That's investedteacher.com/episode 45. Again, that is investedteacher.com/episode 45.
All right, invested students, class dismissed. Just as a reminder, the content you heard here today is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice.
And a reminder, Matt Bigley is a licensed realtor in the province of Ontario with Deerbrook Realty. John is a mortgage agent with Brix Mortgage, BRX Mortgage, license number M23006803. And Kyle Pierce is a licensed life and accident and sickness insurance agent with the Corporate Advisors and Pan Financial team.